I'm Katie from independent social media agency Immediate Future, and we're talking about a revolution because advocacy has moved centre stage in social marketing, and it's accelerated as a programme and changed and charged and pushed it out messaging in ways that we couldn't imagine a couple of years ago. Well, that's what we saw in our latest tech report, and my colleague Belle is going to pop that into chat if you want to download it. But the Tech CMO Outlook report is a collection of interviews with CMOs at B2B brands. And one of the running threads throughout the report is the need to build better, deeper, stronger relationships with our customers, especially on social. And in the last 18 months, we've seen this accelerate and the adoption of employee advocacy go beyond just amplifying messages. And on social, it's been kind of driven, I think, by three things. The first is, of course, the pandemic, a world where everything went virtual. Our trade shows ended, face-to-face meetings ended, and we needed to build rapport with buyers. The answer, of course, was digital and a chance for employees to make direct connections with prospects on social. The second driver of this change has been trust, because sadly, trust in companies is at an all-time low. And in the B2B world, that has seen a shift amongst successful companies, moving slightly away from the lead gen and into much more into branding, but actually whilst putting employees front and center. Your people are your brand, as they say. And finally, the third trigger in this is buyer behaviors have changed. So 75% of B2B buyers admit to using social media to become more informed about vendors. And on social, 48% of decision makers are spending over an hour a week looking at thought leadership that you guys are producing. So they're asking for recommendations and they're getting to know you from the inside out. So this webinar is all about getting into the nitty gritty. And I'm super lucky to have these three amazing guests. I would like to welcome Marlon Linden, Vice President and Head of EMEA Marketing Transformation Office at SAP. Hi, Marlon. Tim Williams, CEO of Analytica.
Hello, Katie.
Hi, David. And Anita Vaselli, who's Director of Social Media and Advocacy at Ericsson.
Hi, Katie.
So we're going to chat for about 45 minutes. Please ask questions, and I'll ask the panel. But welcome, panelists. If you could say a little bit more about yourselves and tell us how you think employee advocacy has changed in the last 18 months. Anita, do you want to start?
Of course, Katie. My name is Anita Vaselli, and as you introduced me, I'm Director of Social and Advocacy at Ericsson. So I'm overseeing the full scope of social, from listening, governance, organic, paid, influencer marketing, employee advocacy, and whatever you can imagine, and connected to social. So there's never a dull moment in my life. To be honest, there's always something happening. And one of my passion is actually employee advocacy. And it has been around. I think the first company started like 10 years ago. And at Ericsson, we have been working together with employee advocacy for about 8 years. But as you said, I think the pandemic really shifted and put it into a spotlight, and it has a revolution. And also how employee advocacy has matured, because at the beginning, it was really kind of like that brand advocacy, sharing content, not necessarily employees as thought leaders. But I think this is what we are talking more and more, that how you make sure that your employee advocacy is authentic. It's not just keep repeating the same messaging without tweaking it and sharing just company news, but really establishing your employees, executives or sales teams as thought leaders in their own space, and really talking about them, not necessarily just the brand.
Lovely. What is that the same over at SAP, Marlon?
Yes, I would definitely say so. And from my perspective, thank you for the introduction. My name is Marlene Lydén. I work at SAP, as you said, and maybe just for introductions and also to show that it's never too late to learn. Now, I like to think I look like 25, but I'm not. I'm definitely a non-digital native. So I grew up with the cassette, playing music on cassette and writing things on paper. But I discovered social, I would say, relatively late in life. Indeed, it's never too late to learn. And I learned from someone, I would say one of the best. We had a CMO at SAP, Jonathan Becker, who was known to be the social CMO. And I worked for him for a few years directly. And I was always amazed how he knows everything. How is it possible that he always knows everything? And I discovered he uses social. And this was the start of something for me. It sparked something for me. And I've had, I would say, the best parts of my career in and around social. I led a social selling program a few years ago, and that's where I also discovered the power of advocacy, because it's nothing much different from social selling. Social selling was an easier sell within the company because you can tie it directly to business results. So it was slightly easier, I would say, to get attention for it. But I've always said since then, and this was 2014, I said since then that advocacy, employee advocacy, is the much bigger opportunity. And we made, in the 2 years that I led the program, the social selling at SAP, we made 1.4 billion pipeline with social selling, and I still argue employee advocacy is the bigger opportunity. And I agree with what you've said before, just to close my introduction, why I think this is so important. The pandemic, I think the pandemic has accelerated many things for us. Going digital was definitely one of them. But also I would like to quote one of my esteemed colleagues at SAP, Timo Elliott, who interprets ROI not as return on investment, but return on interesting. And I think return on interesting has gotten to become a more important metric, also because of the fatigue that we are seeing, the noise that we are seeing, the volume of information, of offers that we have around that people can take advantage of. It is more important than ever to be interesting. And think about it. Your colleagues, your peers are always interesting. And that's why employee advocacy is such a huge opportunity.
Oh, totally. And is it the same for you, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't endorse more what Anita and Marlon have said, and thank you for inviting me on this webinar. So I'm Tim Williams. I'm the CEO of Analytica. We're an employee and influence advocacy tech platform, but we also have supporting consultancy as well. And really over the past 10 years, I've seen a massive shift in change, specifically, and especially from a vendor standpoint that meets a lot of different brands and agencies. 5 years ago, used to meet a lot of brands saying that they've procured a couple of thousand licenses to an employee advocacy platform, and some of the employees are showing the brand content. You get some spammers in there, some people that are doing some effective work, but the program got stuck because it was really about employees sharing brand content. I think the big difference over the past 5 years, and latterly over the past 18 months, obviously since the pandemic, we've seen this change into how can exec comms change from something that's really hard to scale, very, very expensive to support exec leaders, into something that can actually drive like wider leadership. You've seen the emergence of subject matter experts become thought leaders and external influencers rather than just speaking internally to employees. You've seen Marlon talk about social selling. So how can sales create inspiring content for prospects? And then you've got the wider employee base, which is the fourth pillar. So the big difference for me is that it's not a tool for everybody. It's a program to leverage and to support and to enable the different functions and the different personalities further their own objectives. And I think that massive shift is what I've seen from great idea, the program hasn't worked, it must be some technology or the people's fault, to actually it's designed wrongly, and now it's actually for the people, and the brands get it that they need to enable the people, and they'll get the payback from the people, but they can't think about the brand first. It's got to be the other way around. So that's been the big shift that I've seen.
And it's so interesting. It's definitely switched. And Marlene sort of touched on some of this, which is and somebody's asked a question about ROI already, but one of the challenges is when you want to take it beyond, post this brand message out, and give and empower your employees, that you often have to persuade others that there's value in the business, in value in doing this for the business. And there's data from Hinge research which says almost 64% of companies who've used employee advocacy say that they've seen additional revenue, and 45% of companies have seen an attributed revenue. So it kind of plays into what you said, Marlin, which is that you could do revenues, but what is the value? It must be more than just you can make some ROI, direct income from it. What is the real value of?
I think it's so much. It's my favorite topic, and I don't know if it's like the Robin Hood gene in me that just gets happy when it pays off to do the right thing. And with employee advocacy, it pays off to do the right thing. I know we also want to talk about culture later, and I think it's very connected. If you have an open culture, if you encourage your employees to share, if you encourage them to build thought leadership, if you have an environment where it's also safe to say things that you're not entirely sure if it's absolutely signed off by anyone, to feel safe to not just distribute corporate content, then you create variety. You create a volume of voices that are going to tell your corporate story, your company story in a so much more interesting way. So there's much more value. And I've seen some attempts, which I think is interesting, to tie employee advocacy with campaign codes in CRM, so that you can see the advocates who are doing a great job, but they are actually with also multi-touch attribution. You can sort of see how has that contributed to the customer's journey. Maybe it was the thing that made them steer in your direction, but not to be estimated is the volume of voices when it comes to also attracting talent to your company. The war for talent is on. We want the best people to work for our companies. And if you have employee advocates who are talking about your brand in a positive way, what better brand awareness can you get for your company in terms of attracting talent? It's also for people to build networks. Your company is also the net value of the network of the people who work in the company, and the way that they are able to expand and also deepen the quality of their network. Employee advocacy is a perfect way to do that, to build thought leadership, to showcase the competence you have in your company. Employee engagement, building communities. I can go on forever. There is so much value in employee advocacy. I'm surprised that not more companies are investing in it.
And Tim, I'm sure there's also an element of this which is about your employees having that influence, isn't there? There's employee influence, not just externally but internally.
Well, yeah, and I love the conversation. We all know, and I think everyone listening to this, you can speak about the wide-ranging benefits, but then the question is, well, why hasn't it been adopted in a more mature fashion by more organizations? And that's where the really interesting psychological and behavioral makeup of organizations, I think, is the question. And I think that there are, so jumping to the challenges, why some people don't get it. Like I've been in, 6 or 7 years ago, there was a tech organization that when people had 100,000 followers on social, saw them as a threat, or saw that they were going to be poached by a competitor and wanted to own their followers. And that was only 6 or 7 years ago. You see, I've done workshops with professional services companies, and all of the senior executives have said, why should I bother when my end customer is not on social? And so you get execs saying that you don't have the time and stuff like that. And I don't think that maybe I'm late to the party. Like Marlin was saying, maybe this has just passed me by. I'm not a social influencer. This is probably something for someone else. And I think these are some of the challenges. And what I'm really passionate about is the connection between your internal employees, be it exec leaders, subject matter experts, salespeople, HR, marketing, wider employees, whoever it is, but creating content with people who are external to the organization, who have influence. Because I've seen execs go from cynic on social media to speaking to 15,000 people every time they post on social media, and then having that light bulb moment. How can they get to that? They think that that's 10 years away, and they would have to invest 10 hours of their week into social. They just don't have the time. And I think that some of these programs can actually put execs together, say on like a video interview, you can get access to other people's audience, and you can start saying, oh, earlier on today, I spoke to 10 people, but on social, I spoke to 15,000. I'm going to direct more of my time. So I think that there are some kind of changing beliefs and some kind of how do you scale a program? You know, some brands are paying $5,000 per month just to support one exec to get their content out. If you do that across 50 execs, that's really, really expensive. So there's some major hurdles to actually advance the industry, but it's all exciting innovation.
Yes, yeah. And so, Anita, 8 years you've been doing this. You must impart ways in which we could do this better.
Yeah, and I mean, we also went through like different phases. I think it's like every big company. So we started with a small pilot. We proved the value. I think from the early stages, we always had employee advocacy, not just a nice to have, but how does it tie to business objectives? I think already then we have seen that, okay, creating another social corporate account where you need to have everything brand approved, at least a full-time person, but ideally two people who is managing that account. It's quite expensive, and that's only organic, so you don't have paid. But within that business unit, when we started, we already had 50,000 employees, and it had the power. That how can they say it? How can they tell the story, as Malin said, in different ways? From another perspective, we already seen that they are on social, but are they on social as a professional or rather private people? And we started to educate both the line managers who that time they were like, no, we just need to ban social. You know, everyone just should concentrate on their work. I was like, yeah, but you know, you might can do that from your laptop, but they still have mobile. So you cannot really stop them. So it's a lot better approach whenever we work together with them. You are there to support them and also teach them that whenever, you know, it's not university. So showing everything from the corporate world, just you do with your breakfast, lunch, or gym or whatever, it's not necessarily the same. But how can it help them within their career? How can they gain that influence? What is it really for them? And then we started to mature, and the program went on global. Then we had 2 or 3 reorgs when there was not really anyone who was responsible for employee advocacy. And we have seen, and we also had the question, because it's an investment, that, well, it doesn't seem to work for us. Should we just drop it? And that's when I came back and I was like, well, you know, if we look around, we can see that it works for other companies. So maybe we should ask the question that why doesn't it work for us? And then we started to investigate that. I like to say that you have 3 main pillars that you need to have in place. And one of that is a tool that is easy to use, easy to share. Through that, you can target to the different internal personas, because from engineers to sales to marketing to PR to executives, you have so different personas internally who need different content for their audiences. Then the training and enablement. If it's not there, they as people, they're not going to mature from the beginner stages, how to become a thought leader or influencer, how to use that for social listening, how to make the right connections, how to create content. And the third one is really the community, that they feel part of that. And that's when you also tie it into internal employee engagement. So I think whenever we started to have, and also someone who's really responsible, having the right KPIs, again, tying it back to business objectives, and quarterly we report on it, then we started to see, and now the full company is behind employee advocacy. And it's never, ever a question that, you know, well, it doesn't seem to work. If something is not necessarily, you know, going upwards, then we start to ask that, okay, what else we can do? Why people are not sharing? What do we need to do to actually get that energy back into the system? So that's kind of like my thought. And I can totally see that I've been there. I'm standing up there in front of, you know, 10 people, that it doesn't work, Anita. We should just drop it. I was like, no.
You've teed me up beautifully for the next question, which is really there's a lot of conversation around culture of advocacy, which is really what in the threads in between your pillars is this culture of advocacy. And Marlin, we've talked about this before, so it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts. What is a culture of advocacy?
Yeah, this is again where my heart is warm, because again, the good ones are rewarded. You can't cheat. There is no shortcut. If you want to be successful with advocacy, I really believe that you need to have that open culture that encourages sharing. I still know companies where only if you're an approved spokesperson you're allowed to talk to someone outside of the company. I don't think it's modern anymore. And I think it's like, Anita also touched on it a little bit. For me, to try to control a message and to try to govern or limit too much is a little bit like trying to hold back a wave of water with your hands. It doesn't work. You get all wet and the water comes through. Instead, you turn around and you ride on the wave and you enjoy the thrill, knowing that maybe I will fall, but I will get up again. So if you have that culture where you're okay to take a risk, maybe someone will say something that is really not approved or maybe not really great. But I also think there is a fine line, of course. If you have employees who make comments that are really not in line with your brand, you have to do something, but it can happen anyway. And so I think it doesn't make sense to limit the ones that are going to do a great job, but rather to support the open culture, to make sure that you have a tolerant culture, that you have a culture where people also feel aligned to the values. Then you won't have as much trouble with people who might share some unwanted messages. But also, a culture can also regulate, if you have a very strong culture, the culture itself will regulate the unwanted aspects that you don't want to see. And that's much better. I ran a big community at SAP, and it was really interesting to see, sometimes in the community, people also say things that you don't like. And they also carry the SAP community brand. You're like, oh, this was unfortunate. But the first thing is, if people also say sometimes things that are not exactly in line, it also shows the world this is a tolerant company. There's space for different opinions. There is a high roof, as we like to say in Swedish, for different opinions. But it also shows that if you have a really strong culture, then you, as a community manager, if you go out and say, oh, you're not supposed to say that, I didn't like it, then people are a little bit like, ha, I'm going to do it anyway. But if the rest of the community has a really strong culture, other community members might come and tap on the shoulder and say, you really criticized SAP here. I didn't think it was, you could have done it differently. You could have gone directly to them. You could have chosen another route, much more powerful. So we are showing that we are open, but if you have a strong culture, you also nurture more constructive discussions. So I think culture, and it's a foundation, and that's why I'm saying it's no shortcut. You have to have a healthy culture, a positive culture, an open culture, then you will win with advocacy. And if you don't, you have some work to do.
It's really interesting because I also think there's another small challenge which is coming through in the questions. And Aoife has asked this question, which I think is just, we're going to start to talk about content, which is what on earth are these employees going to say, which I think is a very interesting, wrong question to ask in a way. So Aoife has asked the question, employee advocacy is so powerful. A lot of CMOs bought into employee advocacy get stuck on a lack of resource to implement the program. What's the panelists' advice on how to overcome that, and particularly when thinking about including third-party content in the program? How do you help with resourcing around content, and how do you help your employees have something to say? It's not a natural thing, is it? Or is it?
So I can offer just a couple of pieces of advice that I've found useful. I think that, and this speaks to the culture of advocacy, but because I feel like every organization has the ingredients, but it's the recipe that you're looking for. It's like if you're making a cake or something like that, you might have all the ingredients in the cupboard, but it doesn't mean to say that you're going to make the same cake. You need to have leadership bought in. You need to have social teams thinking it's not 100% our job, it's actually 1% of everyone's job, and it's intrinsic to the company, and you've got the leadership support. So once you've got that kind of culture, social are looking at content enablement rather than content creation. So that shift in focus is not like the brand logo and the social team have to create all the content. It's how can we work with the various different personalities, and everyone is different, to help them find their own voice, which is leading to Aoife's question, that I think that if you take, and I've employed a lot of influential employees, and this is what they say is really, really important for their journey. They take the ingredients of their company, they take their personal passions, and they decide on the topics that they want to be known for and what their personal objectives are. And then the ones that are really getting ahead, like, focus on how to make it work for them. They're the people that are already out there doing it by themselves. I think to be able to help you to scale this as an organization, it's how can the central program team, whether that's employee advocacy, social, so wherever it sits, marketing, how can you enable people either one-to-one, one-to-many training, one to tens of thousands? How can you scale that up? And it's a mixture of interactive e-learning or training that's available to people at the right level at the right time, and then it's like one-to-one coaching, and then it's maybe something like custom webinars. So you've got to have, because there's not too much resource in social teams or central program teams, and you can get overwhelmed. So I think if you get the culture right, if you focus on how to help the employees find their own voices, and then set up the resource and the enablement to scale, those three elements give you the best chance of social transformation, which is what this is.
Yeah, I totally agree with the investment. It was actually at SAP when we ran the social selling program, the biggest investment was in enablement to do it right. I saw some also question in the beginning around how do you prevent people from just being bots, just spamming things. I'm like, oh, this is what hurts when you see this happening. And sometimes even some tools, it makes it tempting to just take and share and not adding your own comment. And it's again such a shame. And I think from that perspective, when we talk about training and enablement, it's also change management. And I learned something way back from an executive at SAP, and I've never forgotten it in change management. If you force is a strong word, but if you highly encourage someone to do something, you have to create moments of success. You positively force someone to try something, and you do everything in your power to make sure that it's a success, that it feels like a success for the person. Then you never have to convince them again. Never. They will want to do it again, because we can tell people a lot of things, we can do a lot of things, but how we make people feel, they never forget. So if you set things up, and then this is the difference, right? If you spam, if you just take content and you don't add anything to it, you're not going to have a moment of success. You're not going to have much engagement. You're not going to get much back. If you do it the right way, rather quickly, you will notice, people are coming back to me. I'm building networks. I'm opening doors. I'm getting new opportunities. I'm part of interesting conversations. Then you want to do it again. There's nothing worse in this situation than trying to fight an uphill battle to encourage you, please don't forget to share, and here's the tool, pick content here and share, and people are like, oh yeah, I have to do that. They have to want to do it, otherwise it's not going to be sustainable.
Does that mean, that's an interesting one, because Frank Disboy, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, has asked a question about how much non-branded content do you usually curate, recommend versus branded content? And it feels like, Marlon, you're saying that's almost irrelevant to whether it's branded or unbranded. It doesn't really matter. It just matters that they share their expertise or their views or their opinions. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, right? I definitely personally, and it's not an SAP opinion, it's my opinion. I don't know what the SAP opinion is, but I side towards more of non-branded content. But I think the powerful way, if you look at employee advocacy, is the combination. Nothing wrong with sharing branded content if you add your own perspective to it. And it's also an easy way. There are also questions a lot around, how do you get started? It feels like, do I have to write a blog? Yeah, that's very scary. I've never written a blog. How to do that? People feel like, it's a big step. But if you take something that is branded and you tell someone why you are sharing it, why did you find it interesting? Why do you think someone else is going to find it interesting? It's easy and it adds value. And this is, to me, the rule that I tell people when you build your social brand, when you do social media. The rule and the filter that you can take is add value in every interaction. Then you can not go wrong. Then you will build your reputation, you will build your thought leadership. Just have that feel, am I adding value to the conversation, or am I just creating noise or speaking for the sake of speaking? If you just tell people, why did you find this article interesting? You help them. If you go to a webinar like this today and you make a point of just taking a few key points, what did you like? What did you find insightful? You share it after. It's a service to your network, because maybe someone didn't have time, or they had another call they couldn't join. It's great if you can, in a couple of minutes, just say, oh, those were the key points. And maybe I'm interested then to look at the whole thing, but you're being a service to your network. If you're a service to your network, if you're adding value, you cannot go wrong.
Oh, yeah, totally. Karma. Pay it forward, instant karma. Anita, I think there's something you said that really resonates with the conversations I've had with people who own the advocacy program, which is that it can go suddenly very quiet and your employees can get disengaged for a variety of reasons. How, having fixed this, how do you keep employees engaged? How do you manage that process so that they, do you need to incentivize it? I mean, what is it that keeps your employees engaged?
I think there are different ways we can do that. And I also feel and think about myself so many times, because there are times when I'm super active and I really enjoy all the conversations. And there are times when, and I've also felt that in the last 18 months, that sometimes I was just like so tired that I just felt that I cannot give anything. I gave everything to work or to other things. There's no value that I can add to my community, and just forcing myself to share something where I cannot bring my full self, I just didn't feel authentic. And I try to think about that maybe other people are the same. And how can we support them? This is why I think internally that community or culture, what we've mentioned, is so important, that we can speak up and we can discuss that this is how I felt. And maybe together, because there are so many times when like Tim is posting something, or Malin, or you, or Danielle Guzman, or some of the others, and I'm like, oh gosh, I felt tired. But I actually got into that discussion and I just left social with so much energy. And it just sparked something. So I think really sharing these experiences, that how to build an influence. We also have some colleagues who have started their journey like 9 years ago. And now they are showing up on Analytica's influencer map, for example. And of course, we celebrate them and we show them that, this didn't really happen overnight. So it was a lot of sweat and struggle, but how they can show and really feel part of that community. I think sometimes it's also just the reminders. So the advocacy tools make it possible that you can share different things. We also encourage people to share at the beginning of the pandemic how they are working from home, which is a great social content. And of course, we also had people, laptop in a bathtub, which was like, oh gosh, occupational health and safety. So maybe we shouldn't post that, but that was the reality. Just coming back to the things whenever it's not necessarily approved or you get a heart attack. But people feel part of the community, not just internally, but externally. So I think there's a training enablement, the community, the webinars, what also Tim touched upon, the coaching sessions, and how can we support each other to get through those hurdles. Sometimes it's a negative comment that they received and they didn't know how to respond. How can the social team or within the market areas or business areas, anyone, or we also have, now we have, I think, 25 to 50 people who are trained to coach others on their social journey. So it's kind of like that consultancy and really trying to understand people and try to get them through those negative or maybe lack of energy content pieces. Yeah.
And I think I'd really build on what Anita's saying, because it comes down to personal motivation. What are sales motivated by? What are exec leaders motivated by? What are subject matter experts motivated by? If you're tired, you will still do the thing that motivates you. If you don't really want to do it, then you won't. And when I speak to exec leaders to talk about their social activity and their influence, first of all, they don't have a clue what the social media guidelines are, a lot of them, or they wouldn't have read them. Second of all, they said, I'm doing this because I've got a KPI on this. I said, well, what do you personally want to achieve? And then their eyes light up a bit more and say, well, I want to make sure that I hit that KPI. I said, but outside of that, like, what would you personally want to? They say, oh, I'd really love to grow my network or grow community, or this is what and that they're not tuned in to talk about that. Even these are CTOs, these are really CISOs, CIOs, but they're still saying, because my boss says that I should post 4 times a month. And yeah, and really, I think that we can't talk about employees in general, because we know that salespeople are probably focused on how can I influence my customers and build everyone might want to build their personal brand, but they want to drive pipeline. The subject matter experts are probably doing it already. So it's how can you make them more successful? How can you maybe create a program where you can give them opportunities, almost like a VIP program, to connect with external influencers, to have a community, to have a platform, to take the next step and to develop their career. With the exec leaders, do they think that it's important? Like, what do they personally want to achieve, and how do you help them connect those steps out? And I think that I've heard Anita and Daniel Guzman from Mercer speak about it continually, about having the kind of 30-day check-in to see whether they actually achieving some of their steps that they wanted, 30 days into when they made a commitment and you made a commitment on how to support them. So I think it's all down to personal motivation, and the benefit should feel intrinsic rather than like a carrot, to stop the spamming or the activity that you talked about, Marlon, that we don't want to see.
Yeah. Totally. I'm also really sad when I see these type of things, that where people go social because someone told them to, or the manager told them to, or and even sometimes there are these tools where you get points for sharing. It's also a little bit dangerous because it encourages just sharing for the sake of sharing. And that's why I love what you said, Tim, about finding an intrinsic motivation. What's my motivation? And I argue, and I still haven't, I've challenged a lot of audiences. Maybe there is someone here who will take me up on the offer. I challenge anyone to find me a person who cannot get value out of social media. I really dare you. You will not make it, because my opinion is there is value for everyone in social media. And what I want to try to say with that is, not everyone needs to be a blogger. Not everyone needs to be a public speaker. If you talk about building your brand, not everyone is not comfortable. And if you force people to blog, I've seen this happen. You put it as a KPI for people to blog. It's terrible. If you don't like blogging, you're not good at blogging, you don't want to learn it, you do it just to tick a box. You're just diluting really great communities with poor content. It's not a good idea. You have to, as Tim said, help people find their motivation. It could be as easy to just say, I'll start listening on social. Not if you do nothing else, if you listen on social, so much you can do. You start building your network, you start following people, and then I would argue most people, then they do want to jump in and also engage. But as a starting point, if you feel insecure, start with listening. So find your intrinsic motivation, why you want to do it, and find a way to use social that feels comfortable to you to start with, so that you're not scared, you don't feel uncomfortable, you don't feel forced, because nothing good is going to come out of that.
I love that, Marlene. And I think besides like listening, the other thing that definitely can give a benefit to everyone is learning. I think all of our jobs are constantly changing. Just as you said at the beginning, one of your CMOs has been, he knew everything. I learned so much from social and from other practitioners, how you go about employee advocacy. I mean, we had the chance to talk earlier, and I still have some of your quotes, and I just like, I stole them with pride. And it's like, and I think it's just amazing that there are so many content creators, and I learned so much from Twitter, through LinkedIn, through webinars. And that is something that is sometimes not that easy for others. Maybe some doesn't really like to read books, but they have a variety of content. And I also encourage not just my team, but the wider marketing and communication. But I think it's true for data scientists, for salespeople. What are the newest things that are out there? And that really also fosters innovation, not just advocacy culture, but how to bring that knowledge in, and that everyone at the company is really just like listening and learning from others.
Yeah. That, Anita, that's a really good. There's a question. We have a question. Unfortunately, I've got a name for the person who asked it, but it's a good question because should the company help curate that? And they've asked this question, which says, interested to hear how the panel chooses third-party content for their advocacy tools, talking about content not written by employees. So how do you actually share third-party content, and if so, how?
Yes, we do. We encourage, and what we suggest for employees as a general rule of thumb is that whenever they share content, 3 should be third-party content, industry news or whatever they are passionate about. 2 should be Ericsson branded content, and 1 should be personal but not private. So that's kind of like the general rule of thumb. I don't really support whenever it's just branded content. I don't feel that would add value to my community. Actually, most of the time, I don't actually share Ericsson content unless it's something that I'm really, really proud or passionate about, or I can connect it somehow. I'm proud to work for the company, but that it won another deal in 5G is not really, would you care, Katie, if I would share that? You would be probably happy that I'm happy, but it's not how we start a conversation. So we encourage, we also help. We know that what are the telecom news or IoT or 5G or a couple of the topics, what could be interesting. But I think that the main thing, what we try to do is also, first of all, understanding our internal persona. So it's not, for each company, for your customers, you have the persona work, that what do they need and who they are. But I think that work is really, probably it's not an easy thing to do internally, but this is when social teams can work with internal comms or employee engagement or however they are called within the organization, how they deliver the best content or engagement for each of those persona. And then you can also take a look at what are the things that they are passionate about. Your marketing and comms, what are the newest things? Is it an ABM? Is it digital news? How SEO is changing? What are the updates? So it's not necessarily just about the company, but they learn at the same time while they are also consuming third-party content, but they can also share and they can use it to build their thought leadership.
Very much.
And I think that what it's interesting, Anita, when you say that you don't want to share like a successful brand story from Ericsson. That's what everyone feels like. We don't want to shout about, hey, we're the best. We want to show our own value to the community. And so when employee advocacy tools burst on the scene, my view is that this was really for the wider employees, for people to start, to share brand content. But obviously there's some industry content. They can get started. They can hopefully put an opinion on there. But really, when you start getting into a community on social, I don't need an Analytica and employee advocacy tool to be able to be out there community, like, because you get into the algorithm, you get into the channels, and you developed your community. So all of us are relatively mature compared to people who are inactive. So I think that the employee advocacy tools are how do you help them share really great external industry content? That could be third-party influencers, it could be research which is done in your industry, and whatever it is, they're happy to share that. They're also happy to share diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and CSR stuff, and everyone's so proud of that. They naturally want to share that. That's very, very successful. So I'd say that that's content that they intrinsically want to share. When you want to be a subject matter expert or an external influencer, you've got to then go to a different path. And a lot of them don't want to be seen as a salesperson, i.e. promoting their brand. They want to have their own voice. And so that's where I think there's not one tool for everyone. It's really how to decentralize content creation from an employee advocacy tool or a social tool into all your voices. and that's tough, but it's the big win out there.
I love that, decentralizing all the voices. I love that. Fantastic. And actually that brings me somewhat onto a really crucial question for you, Tim, which is talking about B2B influence, which is also accelerating through this period, and how B2B influence is now integrated into employee advocacy, and the two are really sitting very much hand in hand.
Yeah, I think it's just an advocacy play. And what we're talking about is we want personalized content that's more inspiring than brand content. And you've got your internal experts and influencers, you've got the external ones. They're just an individual voice that can help you tell the story. So why not bring them together? I think Anita has a role which covers influencer marketing and employee advocacy. So, and she's doing some great stuff there. So I know that SAP many years back went from product marketing to industry marketing, and that was a big shift. Many years back. So really, we're just talking about creating the right content. And Katie, you talk about it through Immediate Future, breaking through like from the boring social to creating inspiring content. We're all talking about the same thing. The external influencers sometimes have far greater networks that the employees can access. So why not bring them together? Why not create industry panels? Why don't you make it organic? You don't have to pay the influencers if your exec is talking on a peer-to-peer basis with an external influencer. They're just chatting, they're creating really good content that's a win-win. So I think that is really the future. It's the current for the people that are doing it, but it's the future for many brands. And the challenge is breaking down the silos, I think, internally between the people trying to activate internal experts and external ones, and your virtual events, ABM, social selling, all of those internal teams, like how to be able to connect the program with the other colleagues to create this content machine. That's obviously a challenge in really big organizations, but whether it's external influence or internal, it's still a personal voice that can drive real change.
Yeah, and I think this also comes back to the listening that we talked about earlier. Sometimes when we talk about influencers, you have like in your mind Kardashian, so I don't know, that's someone really famous. But they are not always the ones who are going to resonate with our audiences. So for me, the most powerful influencers sometimes are micro influencers. They don't have huge followership, but they are really credible. The nerds, that they are nerding in on a topic that is maybe interesting for also a smaller audience, but for them it's a superstar. So it's also about listening and knowing who is it that your audience is listening to, who has a voice, who is it that has an interesting opinion, maybe also a little bit of an edge, maybe something that makes them particularly interesting for your audience, but really with your audience in mind, to pick those people and try to bring them to your community. For me, the magic triangle is if you combine advocacy and social with influencers and community. People follow these influencers, they want to be part of a community, and if your influencer takes an interest in your brand, then they also will want to be close to you if you give them exclusive opportunities to maybe influence your strategy, to talk to your executives, to give feedback, maybe be a sounding board for your executives. There's also something in it for those influencers. I would personally not pay a lot of money just to have a name say, oh, I think you are really great. Maybe that works for some brands. I think it's more powerful if you find an influencer that takes a real interest in your brand, that is popular in your community, credible in your community with special expertise. Then if you combine these things, social, community, and influencers, that's the best marketing you can do, in my opinion.
I fully agree, Malin. And I would actually say that some of the influencers, how they have been sharing content, or kind of like the amplification, is quite similar. Whenever employees just reshare the branded content, there's not a value add, and you can just like spot it right away that, okay, this is a paid partnership. Whenever, okay, they also have to just ADA and FTC regulations, so it's quite obvious. But I think just looking at how credible is that, rather and instead really choosing the ones who are credible, influential for your audiences. Or I think sometimes we can also ask our experts that, okay, here's a data scientist, so who are the ones in data science who you look up to? who would you love to have a chat or having an introduction, and really trying it either from the employee perspective or from your audience perspective, and then asking those influencers that, just as you said, that what is the value that we can give to you? Would you like to talk to the R&D? Would you like to see that what are some of the things that we are working on? It's an interview or just a discussion with an executive, co-creating a blog, a podcast, a report, a white paper. So there are so many opportunities how we can work with external experts or influencers within this space. And I think it's really, the sky is the limit. And it's just like super exciting. I think just like really looking into all those conversations happening online.
And actually, David brings up a really, really interesting point. He asks this question: curious to know any advantages for internal networking benefits of EA platforms in large international organizations, which of course you're both from. Any good examples or takeaways? Do you want to answer that, Marlin, to begin?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it's sometimes we feel like everything has to be, like, internal communications have to be internal. But if you think about, most of the messages that we share are not super confidential. In fact, we can benefit from other people knowing about them. And I would argue that if you send an internal newsletter or an internal email, not everyone might read it, but if you share something on LinkedIn, that's where people are also spending their time. Sometimes you will ask me, what is the best platform for social media? And I say, where your audience is. And our employees are on Twitter, they are on LinkedIn, and why don't we reach them there? And so both in terms of networking, it's another thing that I said early on, I got quoted a lot from a presentation. I said that social has made business democratic. Because in previous times, if you wanted to speak to a senior executive, you needed to get past the assistant, and the assistants are very skilled. So it was very difficult to get past the assistant to have a phone call or something with a senior executive. On social, if you follow executives, if they are on social, of course, if they are sharing something, they will be flattered. If you follow them, if you comment on their content, and they will see you. This was what I learned also when I worked for the CMO at SAP. People who engaged with his content on social, he saw them naturally. It was just a natural consequence of them engaging, and they found, common interest and common, things they cared about. So I think that there are many benefits also for internal networking, internal sharing of information, unless, of course, it's super confidential, you can't do it. But use also these channels, use the thought leadership that you build externally is going to help you internally too. It's going to increase your voice. You're going to be more well-known internally if you're also well-known externally. Another manager of mine argued that if you want to sell something internally, sell it externally first. See if people catch interest externally. Then the internal executive will say, well, it's catching on some interest here. It must be important. I should pay attention.
Yeah, social proof, isn't it? It's social proof. Other people like this, so you must like it. I love it.
Exactly.
I just want to add one very short story. Rob McCargo from PwC has built his influence around artificial intelligence, and he appears on panels with the CEO of PwC and was flown all around the world, met lots of famous, wonderful people. He's also the internal go-to on that particular topic, and it's ahead of people that are probably have more expertise or have functions in that role, because he's more prolific on social and driving engagement. So if you think about a salesperson as well, do people trust the person that's most visible or the person that is invisible but an expert? And so there's just so much benefit internally and externally, and you see the real life examples of people that are showing up on social.
We've got so many questions, it's driving me mad. That is just, I want to ask this question from Alexis, which I think is really, it's a bit of a summary because we're running out of time, but does starting an employee advocacy program require a lot of investment, i.e. time and budget?
I think time for sure. there is a time investment, because again, in my opinion, there is no shortcut. And so if you have a positive culture, if you have a culture that encourages sharing, it will be easier. If you don't, then you need a bit more work. But I think what you need to invest in my opinion, is education. It's the foundation. And then you can have tools, and technology will help you, and it's also necessary. But for me, it stands and falls with the education, really starting with helping people find their passion. Why can they benefit from being advocates? And what do they want to be advocates for? Something that is special to them, that they care about. Those two components are really, really important. And then you start to create those moments of success, teach people how to do it, show them others who are doing it and being successful with it. And then you start to snowball. And once the snowball is a bit bigger, it's going to roll faster and get bigger and bigger. But in the beginning, you need to push a little bit.
Absolutely. And I also think that there are different ways how companies can get started. Because if you create your employee advocacy, how it helps to reach business objectives, whenever it's revenue, whenever it's attracting future talent, then usually anything that is strategic, usually it's quite easy to get a person and a budget for it. If it doesn't connect to that business strategy, but it's just a nice to have, companies can still get started. I remember I really believed in employee advocacy 8 years ago, and it was my passion project. I started to do it after my daily 8 hours of work. I started to look for similar people in the market areas who are the ones who I can convince and get on board, and maybe we can share budget. Maybe we can also work together to create that strategy to get the buy-in. So there are different ways, but all in all, I have to agree that yes, it's time, it's patience, it's budget, but I truly believe that it makes a differentiation between companies who believe and do employee advocacy and employees are engaged, and also their leadership towards the ones who don't. So I think companies who really believe and work with employee advocacy will be a lot more successful than the ones who don't.
Can I just add a very quick comment to that? Marlin and Anita are wonderful examples of people with long-term visions, and it's so important to believe in the programs and to have that long-term vision. But you can also create a pilot program in 12 weeks to move something very small, which performs so much better than something existing, which you feel is maybe underperforming, which is a quick win that people care about. So never feel like you can't get started. Never feel you can do this on zero budget with a bit of time, but start small, prove it. Obviously budget helps, time and resource helps, but you can absolutely get started in 12 weeks just by designing something that is valuable, niche.
Terrific. Absolutely. We've still got loads of questions as well. So I'm going to say this to finish off, because this has just been brilliant. We're really getting into the nitty gritty of this. Will you come back? Can we do this again after the summer holidays are over? And then I can ask all the other questions like measurement and top do's and don'ts. I've got so many questions. Would you? I'm bullying you because I'm asking.
Oh my God, absolutely.
We won't say no.
Right, we'll put another one in. So if you're attending, watch out for it. So thank you, Marlin. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Tim. We can't really kind of get to the bottom of all your expertise. It's just so fabulous. It's so much experience of real life. Understanding of how you make this work. So I appreciate it. And thank you for watching us today. I hope you got something useful. We got some nice comments coming back. Thank you very much. And have a lovely rest of the week, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.